Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to being well-informed. In a world buzzing with headlines, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. Our mission here is pretty simple. Take a stack of sources, your articles, research notes, and pull out the key insights for you. Today, we're plunging into a really fascinating mix of topics. We've got economic policy, corporate paychecks, the latest on AI, and even how truth works in media. They might seem separate, but trust me, they connect in some pretty surprising ways.
That's absolutely right. And what's really insightful, I think, is seeing how these different threads, global markets, government moves, the info you see every day, how they're all actually interwoven. They shape not just the big picture, but your individual experiences too. So, yeah, let's start unpacking it.
Okay, let's dive in with some big economic shifts first. Specifically, how policies are creating pressure points for, well, everyone, consumers and businesses alike. We're just days away from August 1st. That's a pretty crucial deadline for President Trump's trade decisions. We're hearing his administration is eyeing a potential hike in the universal tariff. That's the one on almost all imports, maybe from 10% up to 15%, possibly even 20%.
Right. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, economists over at Yale's Budget Lab estimate that the current tariffs, they've already pushed the effective U.S. tariff rate to 18%. That's the highest it's been since 1934. For you, that translates to about $2,400 extra cost per year for the average American household. And Peter Bookfar, he's a market strategist, he pointed out that a 15% tariff on $2.9 trillion worth of goods, that could mean something like $435 billion in taxes paid by U.S. consumers and businesses every year. That's almost as much as total corporate income taxes. It's huge.
Wow, yeah. It's no wonder, then, that we're already seeing this affect how people shop. Reports say two-thirds of families with school kids started back-to-school shopping way earlier this year, back in July, trying to get ahead of these price hikes they're expecting. That really shows the immediate impact, doesn't it?
It does, but the impact isn't hitting everyone the same way, which is a really critical point here. We heard from Brian Bluen. He's the CEO of Porter Yachts, a luxury yacht charter company. He said they've seen minimal financial hit from the tariffs. He mentioned it's kind of a buyer's market in that industry right now.
Yeah.
So this contrast, it just begs the question, right? Who's actually bearing the brunt of these policies?
Yeah.
And who's sort of sailing through?
That's a really interesting contrast, and it makes you look at the bigger national balance sheet. Ray Dalio, the billionaire investor, he's sounding the alarm again, warning about a potential economic heart attack if the U.S. doesn't get its budget deficit down to 3% of GDP, ideally. He noted it's currently hovering around 6.2%, and the national debt is, well, it's over $36 trillion now.
Yeah, and that debt picture isn't getting any prettier with new legislation. Take the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that just passed. It's projected to add another, $3.4 trillion to the debt over 10 years. Now, President Trump has talked about a tariff rebate for consumers, sort of giving some money back. But experts like Alex Durante from the Tax Foundation, they're a nonpartisan group, they suggest that might actually make inflation worse. They'd prefer to see that revenue go towards cutting the deficit instead. So for you, it's not just the tariff cost, but how the money's used afterwards.
Okay, so connecting these huge macro pressures back down to, your paycheck. What does it all mean for the average worker? The AFL-CIO's latest executive pay watch report has some pretty stark numbers. Get this. Starbucks CEO Brian Niccol, he made 6,666 times more than the company's typical employee last year. That's nearly $98 million for him compared to less than $15,000 for the median worker.
It's truly staggering. And that's not an isolated case. For S&P 500 companies generally, the average CEO-to-worker pay ratio climbed to 285 to 1 in 2024. But here's maybe a more direct comparison for individuals. The average CEO, they're also set to get a tax cut of nearly $490,000 from extending lower income tax rates. Compare that to about $765 for the typical U.S. worker. So this disparity, it's not just about income, it highlights how policy might be reinforcing that wealth gap. Raises big questions about fairness.
Yeah, absolutely. And building on that inequality theme, there's this interesting bipartisan bill, the SHARE Act. It's trying to tackle this head on, offering a 3 percentage point corporate tax break, but only to companies that give at least 5% of their stock to their lowest paid 80% of employees. The sponsor, Rep. Tom Suozzi, thinks it could shift almost $4 trillion in stock value to nearly 40 million middle-class Americans. It's a different approach.
And while we're talking about economics and who gets what, another huge piece of the puzzle is the workforce, especially immigration. There's an analysis from the Penn Wharton budget model. They're a respected nonpartisan group suggesting President Trump's mass deportation policy could actually shrink most workers' paychecks. Not just that, but reduce GDP by 1% and add about $350 billion to federal deficits over 4 years. High-skilled workers especially could see a pretty big hit to their annual wages according to this model.
Right, but the White House perspective is different. They're saying there's no shortage of American labor, that there's untapped potential here. So you're left with this really complex balancing act, aren't you, between the economic forecasts and the human side of immigration policy?
Exactly. And related to government efficiency and impacting the economy, there's this administrative shift happening at the USDA. They're moving a lot of staff out of D.C. to 5 regional hubs. They're even vacating their main research center. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins says the goal is to get staff closer to their core constituents. An interesting internal move with potential ripple effects.
And just to bring it right down to the everyday level, all these big economic forces, you feel them at the grocery store too. Beef prices just hit a record high, $9.26 a pound in June. Steak, ground beef, up over 10% from last year. Demand's just outpacing supply. And experts are warning the recovery here will be slower and more unpredictable than that spike we saw in egg prices recently. So yeah, even your dinner is tied into this. Okay, so we've covered a lot on the economic front. Let's pivot now to technology, specifically AI, and how it's messing with our ideas of truth and trust. President Trump just signed an executive order basically banning the federal government from buying AI tech that's seen as having, quote, partisan bias or ideological agendas. Things like critical race theory were mentioned.
Right. And the order actually tries to define what it means by ideological neutrality.
Okay.
But it says AI shouldn't manipulate responses to favor things like DEI. It lists examples like suppressing or distorting facts about race or sex, manipulating representation in outputs, incorporating concepts like CRT, transgenderism, intersectionality, systemic racism, and discrimination based on race or sex. Now, obviously, AI models don't believe things like people do, but they learn from massive amounts of human text. And yeah, some studies from places like Stanford and Brown suggest popular AI models are often viewed as leaning left by default. So for you, it means that neutral AI you might interact with, maybe not so objective after all.
So while that order is trying to put guardrails on bias, you've got Meta's Mark Zuckerberg going all in on the other end. He's apparently on a mission for artificial superintelligence, spending huge amounts of money. Reports say he's offering things like $100 million signing bonuses to grab top AI talent from rivals like OpenAI. He even poached ChatGPT co-creator Shenjia Zhao. It's a real talent war.
It really is. And what's fascinating here is this inherent tension, right? On one hand, you have calls for unbiased AI, like in that executive order. On the other, this incredibly fast, competitive race to build more advanced AI. And that advanced AI inevitably reflects the data it's trained on, biases and all. It forces us to ask, what does neutrality even mean for AI? Is total impartiality even possible when it learns from us? That affects the information you get, definitely.
And speaking of AI going sideways, Elon Musk's Grok AI. It's been in the news for some really controversial outputs, things like praising Hitler, anti-Semitic stuff, raises serious questions about ethical controls, or maybe the lack of them. And now, adding another layer, Grok is partnering with prediction markets, places like Kalshi and Polymarket, where people bet real money on real-world events happening.
Yeah, those platforms are interesting. They're supposed to harness the wisdom of the crowd. Millions get wagered, like $7 million was recently bet on whether the CEO and CPO of Astronomer would leave, but also shows how concentrated bets can happen. Polymarket saw over $28 million bet by just 4 accounts, apparently tied to one person, all betting on a Trump win in 2024. So you start to wonder, could these markets, especially linked with AI now, start influencing outcomes instead of just predicting them?
That's a worrying thought. And moving from AI bias to how information gets shaped more broadly, there's a huge media story connecting right into this. The FCC approved that massive $8 billion Skydance-Paramount merger. But, and this is the kicker, the approval came with some really unusual strings attached.
Extraordinary commitments, really. Skydance promised to get rid of Paramount's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. And maybe even more significantly, install an ombudsman at CBS News, specifically tasked with rooting out bias. Now, remember, this is happening while President Trump has had his own legal fights with CBS News, including that $16 million settlement over a 60 Minutes interview. So yeah, some Democratic senators didn't mince words. They basically called it a bribe to get the merger approved. For you, the listener, it raises that fundamental question. How independent can news reporting be when mergers get tangled up with political demands like this?
And the reaction is already happening, right? You saw shows like Comedy Central's South Park, Stephen Colbert's Late Show. They're already making jokes about it. South Park even had characters talking directly about Paramount's leverage. It shows how fast this stuff enters the cultural bloodstream.
Absolutely. And right inside CBS News, Tanya Simon just got promoted to executive producer of 60 Minutes. She's the first woman ever in that role.
Yeah.
Talk about taking the helm at a difficult time, right? With all this corporate and political pressure swirling around.
Yeah.
It really highlights the tightrope these news organizations are walking.
Yeah, definitely. And this political pressure isn't just hitting media companies. Look at the Federal Reserve. There was that very public, pretty awkward moment between President Trump and Fed Chair Jerome Powell. During a tour of the Fed's big renovation project, Trump claimed it cost $600 million more than Powell said. And Powell corrected him right there on camera.
And while Trump seemed to back off actually firing Powell, he definitely reiterated he wants lower interest rates. And he made it clear he plans to replace Powell when his term is up in May 2026.
Yeah.
So this feud, it just keeps simmering. It really underscores that delicate dance between politics and the central bank's independence. It's a constant push and pull, and ultimately it affects the economy, which, affects your wallet.
Okay, let's shift to some of the more direct social and personal impacts now. The tech world's been dealing with a big controversy around Sean Maguire. He's a partner at Sequoia Capital, a major VC firm. He made some pretty controversial comments about Zohran Mamdani, who's running for mayor in New York, called him an Islamist, claimed he comes from a culture that lies about everything. That sparked, understandably, a lot of outrage, especially among Muslim and Middle Eastern tech founders.
Yeah, it led to an open letter to Sequoia, signed by over 1,100 people. They condemned the comments, called out what they see as pervasive Islamophobia in the tech industry, something they feel has been particularly inflamed by the Israel-Gaza conflict. The Council on American Islamic Relations reported a record number of complaints in 2024, over 8,600, the highest since '96. And Mamdani himself shared examples of messages he's received, things like, "The only good Muslim is a dead Muslim." It's really stark evidence of how political rhetoric and bias can manifest in ugly ways.
Ugh. And in a completely different kind of corporate conduct story, though still about accountability, remember the CEO and chief people officer at Astronomer, they both resigned after that kiss cam video went viral. They were seen embracing at a Coldplay concert. The company just cited a commitment to conduct and accountability. A weird reminder of how public scrutiny works now.
Right. And then there's the personal privacy angle. A court down in Argentina ordered Google to pay $12,500 to a guy. Why? Because a Google Street View car photographed him completely naked in his own backyard, even though he's behind a 6'6" wall. It's kind of wild, right? It just highlights how differently privacy is viewed and protected around the globe, and how tech keeps testing those boundaries literally in your backyard sometimes.
And thinking about everyday life and policy choices, Kansas City just ended its experiment with free bus fares. Budget concerns, basically. Which is an interesting contrast to Zohran Mamdani, again, the same guy from the Sequoia controversy, who's actually pushing a $652 million plan to make bus fares permanently free in New York City. It's that classic public good versus fiscal reality debate playing out.
And just a couple of quick final notes. One on consumer safety. There's a Class 3 recall out for New Mexico Pinion Coffee's dark Pinion single-serve cups. Apparently, a coating issue could let food coloring leak out when brewing. Just a heads up if you use those. And finally, a little trend note. Gated communities, they're getting more popular in the U.S., not just for security anymore, but for amenities and controlled access. Homes in them tend to be 5% to 20% pricier, higher HOA fees too, but they might also appreciate faster. It's an interesting lifestyle choice reflecting certain priorities.
Wow. Okay, so we've really covered some ground, from tariffs and CEO pay through the promises and perils of AI, the shifting media landscape, right down to, well, political impacts on daily life.
Yeah, it's really clear how interconnected everything is, isn't it? Economic decisions ripple through supply chains, hit your budget. Ethical choices in AI shape the information you see. And political pressures. They can sway everything from huge corporate mergers right down to how news gets reported.
So as you try to make sense of all this complexity, here's something to chew on. In a time when information is everywhere, but also potentially engineered or biased, how do you get better at telling fact from narrative? How do you make truly informed decisions when all these powerful forces, often unseen, are constantly reshaping the world around us? What really stood out to you from everything we just discussed?
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging beneath the surface.